Rowan Hale executed the temporal correction on June 14th, 5 years before the terminal collapse of his initial timeline. He succeeded in abandoning Vivian Locke, the acknowledged source of his previous decade of emotional and professional ruin. He believed the immediate rupture had eliminated the consequence entirely. This proved to be a critical miscalculation. Despite the surgical precision of his historical adjustment, the debt remained fixed. He ultimately lost Eleanor Grant, the woman the timeline correction was specifically intended to secure. To document this inevitable failure, one must examine the moment of divergence. Rowan woke abruptly on October 12th. He was 29. The air in the minimalist, expensive apartment was thick with Vivian's influence, a presence he now recognized as emotional quarantine. In the original reality, he had allowed 5 more years to pass here, 5 years that enabled Vivian to systematically dismantle his career prospects and alienate him from those who mattered, most notably Ellie. He stared down at the platinum wedding band. The removal of this object in the previous reality had required weeks of agonizing debate and paralyzing fear. Now, armed with predictive memory, the action was clinical. He ripped the band off his finger, tossing the heavy metal onto the pristine, gray granite counter. The sound was distinct and final. He moved quickly through the living space, ignoring the calculated perfection of Vivian and Oppo's interior design, the sharp lines, the muted, controlling color palette. He retrieved a small, pre-identified bag containing essential documents. Vivian emerged from the master bedroom. Her composure was absolute. Blonde hair perfectly straight, eyes assessing the disturbance. End quote. Rowan? End quote. She inquired, the tone suggesting mild inconvenience rather than concern. He provided no explanation, no apology, and no emotional farewell. Objectivity was mandated. End quote. I am leaving, end quote. Rowan stated. The words were flat, devoid of the emotional chaos they had caused in the first timeline. Vivian's expression remained neutral. She did not plead. She did not initiate conflict. This lack of resistance was the first critical deviation from his memory, and the origin of his subsequent fatal error. Rowan walked out, convinced he had achieved absolute freedom. He failed to register the cold, subtle calculation in Vivian's eyes as the door closed. He failed to comprehend that destiny required payment, regardless of the method of departure. Rowan Hale executed the plan with mechanical precision. He woke at the designated moment, 7:15, in the shared apartment. The morning light, harsh and unfiltered, illuminated the pristine, cold surfaces favored by Vivian Locke. He avoided the kitchen, where she was likely preparing her precise morning tea, a ritual of control he had endured for years in the timeline he just escaped. He found Vivian in the living area, reviewing a document. Her posture was impeccable, her blonde hair perfectly smooth. He did not sit. He did not raise his voice. He initiated the conversation exactly 3 minutes after entering the room. End quote. I am leaving, end quote, he stated. Vivian lowered the document slowly. Her expression did not register shock or anger, only clinical appraisal. This reaction was the first deviation from the historical timeline, where she had erupted into manipulative tears and threats. This time, she simply tilted her head. End quote. This is unexpected, Rowan. After all this time, end quote, end quote. It should have happened years ago. The duration is irrelevant now, end quote. He reached into his pocket, extracting the platinum band he had purchased for her in a moment of delusional optimism. He placed it deliberately on the mahogany coffee table. He then pulled the symbolic wedding ring from his own finger, tossing it next to hers. The metallic clink was the only sound in the apartment. End quote. I need you to understand this is final, end quote. Rowan continued, end quote. There will be no communication, no negotiation. I will arrange the formal separation through council immediately, end quote. Vivian stood. She walked toward the large window overlooking the city skyline, her back to him. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, entirely devoid of the emotional volatility he remembered. End quote. Go then, Rowan. Go seek whatever misplaced happiness you believe you deserve. But understand this, leaving me is an action. Actions carry weight. You may leave the relationship, but you cannot leave the narrative. Not entirely, end quote. Rowan registered the implied threat, but interpreted it as standard bitterness. He gathered the single briefcase he had pre-packed days before the time reset and walked out the door. The immediate surge of relief was potent and intoxicating. He had done it. He had broken the cycle before it could fully consume him. For the first 2 weeks, Rowan focused on establishing his new baseline. He secured a small, quiet apartment in the city's historic district. He engaged with his work, attempting to repair the damage his relationship with Vivian had inflicted on his professional ambition in the original timeline. He felt light, unburdened. Then the consequences began to manifest, not as direct attacks, but as atmospheric pressure. The first incident involved Miles Hale, Rowan's older brother. Miles, normally protective but candid, became reserved. During a casual dinner meeting, Miles avoided discussing the abrupt separation entirely. End quote. People are talking, Rowan, end quote. Miles finally conceded, pushing his plate aside. End quote. Not about the break itself. People break up. They are talking about the context. End quote. End quote. What context? End quote. Rowan asked. End quote. Vivian is being very quiet about it. Exceptionally graceful, actually. She mentioned vaguely to a few key contacts that the stress of your recent difficulties had taken a severe toll on your judgment. She implied that your decision to leave was sudden, perhaps erratic. End quote. Rowan felt a sudden chill. Vivian was employing passive character assassination. By remaining silent and appearing wounded yet dignified, she allowed mutual associates to fill the emotional vacuum with assumptions detrimental to Rowan. She had not tried to win him back. She was ensuring that his freedom came at a social and professional cost. Within the subsequent month, 2 significant professional opportunities Rowan had meticulously cultivated vaporized. The reasons cited were administrative, but the subtext was evident. A prominent architect, Mr. Thompson, cited, end quote, concerns about long-term stability, end quote, regarding Rowan's firm. Thompson was a close friend of Vivian's influential social circle. Rowan felt the familiar paranoia return, a ghost of the past timeline manifesting in this new reality. He found himself compulsively checking emails and phone records, searching for the overt confrontation that never arrived. Vivian was invisible, yet her presence was everywhere, a calculated, systemic retraction of goodwill. He began therapy with Dr. Evelyn Shore, partly to manage the existential dissonance of his time travel experience, and partly to gain objective insight into his emotional response to Vivian's indirect warfare. End quote. You describe a fear of consequences that seemed disproportionate to the action taken, end quote. Dr. Shore observed during their 3rd session. End quote. You left the relationship. That is freedom. Why are you acting like the debt has increased? End quote. Rowan could not explain the true reason. The debt was incurred in a different reality, but the collector, Vivian, was demanding payment in this one. Despite the low-grade anxiety, Rowan pursued the one thing he had traveled back for, a genuine connection with Eleanor Grant. He encountered her exactly as planned, at a small gallery opening focusing on emerging regional artists. Ellie, with her soft smile and artistic sensibility, represented the pure potential of the life he had sacrificed. Their initial interaction was tentative but hopeful. Ellie possessed a natural openness, contrasting sharply with Vivian and Appo's guarded rigidity. Rowan found himself confessing small, innocuous truths, something he had forgotten how to do. However, the influence of the revised narrative quickly reached Ellie. Days after their first date, during a conversation about their past relationships, Ellie introduced the subject tentatively. End quote. Someone mentioned your recent separation, end quote. Ellie said, her gaze steady, end quote. It sounds like it was very hard for Vivian, end quote. Rowan stiffened, end quote. It was difficult for both of us. It was necessary, end quote. End quote. They implied that you initiated the break quite abruptly. that you might have been going through a period of unpredictability. And, quote, the objective, dry reporting of the rumors hit Rowan with force. This was not the standard residue of a breakup. This was targeted, manipulative framing. Vivian had successfully painted him as the unstable, damaged party, even when he had made the objectively correct decision to leave. Ellie's expression conveyed sympathy, but her eyes held a subtle question. Was this man carrying emotional baggage so immense that the act of abandoning the past had simply redistributed the weight onto his future? The foundation of their new connection, meant to be pristine, was already being tainted by the consequences of the choice he had made in an effort to secure it. Rowan realized, with cold dread, that leaving Vivian had only changed the terms of the fight, not the inevitable price he was destined to pay. The debt was being collected, one whispered rumor at a time. The temporal shift had provided no emotional amnesty. Rowan Hale had executed the plan. He had left Vivian Locke swiftly and cleanly, 5 years before the original catastrophic split. He began the pursuit of Ellie Grant, establishing the foundation of a life he felt he deserved. He anticipated freedom. He received friction. The initial indicators were professional. 2 separate freelance contracts, secured through extensive prior networking, were terminated within a 4-week span. The stated reasons were vague and, quote, misalignment of future projections and, quote, concerns regarding recent professional instability, end quote. Rowan challenged the decisions. He had no recent instability. His record in this new timeline was impeccable. He located the primary reference used for the terminations, an anonymous report filed to a centralized industry database detailing erratic financial behavior 2 years prior. This event had never occurred in this present reality, but it precisely mirrored the professional near-disaster Vivian had orchestrated in the timeline he had abandoned. The problem had escalated from bad luck to targeted consequence. Rowan began spending his evenings tracking the source of the anonymous reports. He cross-referenced IP addresses and filing metadata. All paths led to deliberately untraceable entities, but the underlying narrative structure was undeniably Vivian's. She was not pursuing him directly. She was ensuring the soil of his new life remained toxic. Ellie Grant, oblivious to the metaphysical conflict, observed the behavioral shift in Rowan. Their relationship progressed with a necessary caution on her part, given her own history of complicated attachments. Rowan frequently displayed a paranoia inconsistent with his stated calm demeanor. He would abruptly cancel dates, citing, and quote, unforeseen administrative damage control, and quote. He slept poorly, haunted by dreams where the wedding band he had removed in the past continually reappeared on his finger, heavy and cold. During a discussion about a planned move to a new apartment, Rowan panicked when Ellie suggested they use the same real estate agent who had helped her in the past. Rowan remembered that agent, Mr. Vance, as a casual acquaintance of Vivian in the original life, a man who had inadvertently supplied Vivian with critical information during their divorce. Rowan's refusal was immediate, harsh, and illogical to Ellie. And quote, I cannot use him, Ellie. He is compromised, end quote. Rowan stated, his voice flat with certainty, end quote. Compromised by what, Rowan? He found me a perfect place, end quote. She countered, confused by the severity of his reaction to a civilian matter. Rowan could not tell her that the man was compromised by a history that no longer existed, a betrayal that only one person in the universe remembered. He settled on a weak defense, end quote. I prefer to compartmentalize my professional life, end quote. Ellie accepted the explanation, but the incident registered. Rowan's behavior was that of a man running from immediate physical danger, not merely avoiding a past relationship. The escalating professional attacks forced Rowan to seek external consultation, disguised as a stress management need. He consulted Dr. Evelyn Shore. He presented his situation not as time travel fallout, but as acute post-traumatic stress disorder resulting from his previous engagement with Vivian, end quote. I left her, doctor, end quote. Rowan explained, meticulously controlling his inflection, end quote. I established the clean break, but the collateral damage is still reaching me. It and Oppos. Like the moment I stepped away, She engineered a ghost of our crisis to follow me, end quote. Dr. Shore noted his extreme detachment and the objective language used to describe emotional turmoil. End quote. Rowan, the emotional residue of a toxic relationship does not merely follow you. It resides within your reaction mechanisms. You are anticipating punishment. You are still allowing her past actions to define your present fear. End quote. Rowan knew the diagnosis was incomplete. This was not merely fear, it was verifiable sabotage. Driven by desperation, Rowan tracked down Miles, his brother, who had access to high-level industry data. Rowan demanded information regarding the source of the anonymous professional attacks. Miles was initially reluctant, concerned about Rowan's increasing fixation. End quote. I need to know exactly who is filing these reports, Miles. I need a name or an organization. It's systematic, not random, end quote. Rowan insisted. Miles finally complied, accessing internal security records flagged for unusual activity related to Rowan's identity. Miles delivered the revelation in a single, objective statement, end quote. The financial reports detailing misrepresentation were filed by an offshore LLC based in the Cayman Islands. The LLC is controlled by 3 holding companies. The contact address for the director of record is the former personal mailing address of Theodore Vance, the real estate agent Ellie mentioned, end quote. Rowan stared at the screen data. The pattern was clear. Vivian had established an apparatus of revenge before he even made contact with Ellie in this timeline. She had not forgotten him. She had simply redefined the battleground. Theodore Vance, compromised in the original timeline by association, was now actively utilized by Vivian in this new timeline, confirming her immediate and calculated response to his abandonment. But the full shock arrived in the secondary data Miles provided. End quote. Rowan, the reports aren't and oppos. Designed to destroy your reputation outright. They are designed to make your professional life impossible precisely in the demographic that matters to Ellie. The firm funding this LLC is heavily involved in the regional art financing sector, Ellie's entire network. End quote. This was the pivot. Vivian had not sought to punish Rowan by making him miserable. She sought to punish him by contaminating the one thing he had traveled back in time to secure: his relationship with Ellie. The professional damage was a mechanism intended to sever the connection, forcing Ellie to question his stability and credibility within her own highly specialized social and professional sphere. Rowan felt a cold dread supersede his fear. He had changed the past, but the consequence, filtered through Vivian's persistent malice and the immutable law of emotional debt, was now focused entirely on the future he desired. The pressure became unbearable. Rowan began a systematic, measurable withdrawal from Ellie. He canceled weekend plans, citing professional crises that he was, in fact, creating himself by investigating Vivian's network. He initiated the psychological distance necessary to protect her from the fallout he now knew was inevitable. He had left Vivian, the wrong woman, but the resulting debt was being collected through Ellie, the woman he desperately needed. The escalation had achieved its purpose. Rowan's attempts to fix the past had only guaranteed the loss of his future, not through his own error, but through the implacable design of the person he thought he had escaped. The price was not avoidance. The price was certainty. Rowan had successfully navigated 5 months in the revised timeline without deviation. He had avoided contact with Vivian, established a working rapport with Ellie, and maintained professional stability. However, the anticipated sense of victory had dissolved, replaced by a subtle, creeping anxiety rooted in the knowledge that Vivian had redirected her efforts, focusing on his periphery. Miles Hale, Rowan's older brother, initiated the final, decisive action. Miles arranged a meeting, ostensibly about family finances, but the conversation quickly shifted to Rowan's erratic emotional profile. Miles detailed 3 separate instances where Rowan's professional judgment had been questioned by board members, all contacts previously cultivated by Vivian. Miles did not accuse Rowan of instability directly, but rather pointed out the persistent, verifiable pattern of distrust that now followed him. Miles advised him to step back from decision-making, citing a need for self-reflection and professional liability management. Rowan knew the attacks were fabricated, But the consequence of the fabrication was tangible and destructive. This manufactured instability was the ground Vivian needed. She initiated her final action by contacting Ellie indirectly. Vivian did not accuse Rowan of anything, which was her most effective weapon. Instead, she expressed deep, simulated concern for Rowan's mental health, forwarding a carefully curated selection of texts and photographs. These artifacts were fragments pulled from the original, failed timeline, moments of Rowan's deepest despair while still married to Vivian, edited and presented as proof of his current, ongoing obsession with emotional volatility and fear of commitment. The critical artifact was the photo, the partially recomposed image that symbolized Rowan's initial regrets. Vivian presented this image to Ellie's close friend, claiming Rowan kept it as a morbid reminder of his and Appo's true love and Appo's, suggesting he was merely using Ellie to distract himself from his unresolved damage. The narrative was simple and deadly. Rowan had left Vivian, but he had not left the pain or the debt that defined the relationship. The confrontation occurred on a Tuesday evening in Ellie's small art studio. The atmosphere was sterile, lacking the usual warmth. Ellie approached the situation with the surgical precision of someone finalizing a report. She did not yell. She used facts. End quote. The consistency is what concerns me, Rowan, end quote. Ellie stated, placing the physical evidence on a low table. End quote. It is not about who Vivian is. It is about the trail of destruction that follows you, regardless of the timeline or the choice you make. End quote. Rowan stared at the distorted images, snapshots of a broken man he technically was no longer, yet the scars remained. He saw the edited texts, confirming his emotional fragility from the timeline he had desperately tried to erase. End quote. I left her, end quote. Rowan insisted, the objectivity of his own voice failing him under pressure. End quote. I made the choice to save myself and to find you, end quote. Ellie tilted her head, maintaining eye contact. End quote. The choice to leave Vivian was the correct action. But the debt you accrued while you were with her, the emotional exhaustion, the paranoia, the lack of fundamental self-trust, that debt was internalized. You brought it with you, end quote. Rowan recognized the core truth of her statement. He had believed that simply changing the external circumstances, removing Vivian, would negate the internal price. He was wrong. The damage was done not just by Vivian, but within him while allowing her influence. End quote. She manipulated this, end quote. Rowan argued weakly, attempting to separate the causality. End quote. This is not real, end quote. End quote. It may be manipulation, end quote. Ellie conceded, picking up one of the fabricated documents. End quote. But manipulation only works if there is a fundamental instability for it to latch onto. You are unstable, Rowan. Not because you miss her, but because you allowed her to break fundamental pieces of you. And you never repaired them before seeking me. End quote. The resolution arrived swiftly and without fanfare. Ellie stated that she could not build a relationship with a man who was still carrying the residue of a toxic past, even if the primary source of that toxicity had been successfully ejected. Rowan had solved the problem of the woman, but he had not solved the problem of himself. End quote. You changed the trajectory, Rowan, end quote. Ellie concluded, gathering her notes, end quote. But the cost remained the same. You exchanged one form of payment for another. End quote. She left the studio immediately. Rowan did not attempt to stop her. He watched her departure, the silence of the room filling with the realization that the time travel had granted him a chance at correction, not absolution. He had paid the price. The destiny he feared, loneliness and profound regret, was not tied to Vivian, but to the unresolved emotional debt that permeated his being. He had lost Ellie, not due to Vivian's presence, but due to Vivian's lasting influence on his ability to trust and be trusted. He stood there, physically free of the toxic woman, yet emotionally bound by the history they shared. The weight of the consequences was palpable. He looked down at his left hand, the spot where the wedding band had resided in the original timeline. The ring was absent, but the faint, ghostly impression of the metal remained etched into the skin. A permanent scar indicating the cost of his choices, immutable across any timeline. Justice Poetica had been served. The debt was collected. He had chosen right, yet still paid the ultimate price. I know that this story is intense, and that is why I share these moments. If you value the truth and like stories that make you think and feel, do this. Consider subscribing to the channel and comment with the city you are watching from. It is the best way to ensure that you do not miss the next lesson in life. The final separation from Eleanor Grant occurred 6 weeks after the incident. It was not characterized by anger or overt accusation, but by the quiet certainty of irreconcilability. Ellie confirmed that while she believed Rowan had genuinely ended his relationship with Vivian, she could not reconcile the man she saw, still burdened by an invisible history of conflict, with the partner she required for stability. The damage was structural, not circumstantial. Rowan accepted this verdict without protest. His subsequent professional assessment confirmed that the operational failure of his time jump was complete. He had successfully removed the external contaminant Vivian Locke from his timeline. However, the emotional trauma sustained during the original timeline had imprinted itself upon his psyche, creating a self-sabotaging mechanism that guaranteed the same outcome: the forfeiture of Ellie. Dr. Evelyn Shore, maintaining her objective detachment throughout the therapy sessions, provided the clinical framing for Rowan and Appo's situation. She diagnosed it not as guilt over Vivian, but as a severe case of emotional debt. Rowan had focused exclusively on correcting the external action, leaving Vivian, neglecting the essential requirement of internal processing and healing. The time jump had accelerated the events but had not bypassed the necessary psychological reconstruction. The debt remained due, payable in the currency of loneliness. Miles Hale, observing his brother from a distance, summarized the situation with pragmatic clarity. He noted that Rowan had mistaken proximity for causality. Leaving Vivian was merely the first step in a long sequence of necessary self-repair. Because Rowan skipped the trauma healing, seeking immediate reward, the universe, or as Miles preferred to call it, emotional inertia, reasserted the consequences. Rowan returned to the original apartment he had shared with Vivian for a brief period, observing the space devoid of the shadows he remembered. He retrieved the torn photograph, which he had obsessively monitored throughout the narrative, hoping it would reassemble completely now that he had made the right choice. The image remained partially torn. The photograph of himself and Ellie, laughing innocently, was intact, but a permanent tear line still severed his own image from hers, symbolizing the irreparable fracture in his life capacity. He finally understood the bitter poetic justice of his situation. He had used the gift of time revision purely as a tool for evasion, believing that correct actions automatically yielded correct consequences. The universe, however, demanded authenticity. He lost Ellie not because Vivian won a new battle, but because he was psychologically incapable of accepting the love he desperately sought. He remained the wounded man, regardless of the date on the calendar or the woman by his side. The price of leaving the wrong woman too late was the same as leaving her at the correct time without self-healing. Isolation. Vivian had served as a distraction from his own internal flaws in the first timeline. In the second, his desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of that distraction became the flaw itself. Rowan initiated a new phase of life characterized by rigorous emotional inventory and solitude. He ceased attempting to contact Ellie, respecting the boundary she had established. The recurring dream of the wedding ring briefly reappearing on his finger finally subsided. He understood that the specter of the ring represented not Vivian, but the emotional chains he imposed upon himself. The ultimate lesson of Rowan Hale's revised existence is stark and unwavering. You cannot outrun the consequences of profound emotional neglect, even with a temporal advantage. Emotional debt is independent of timeline causality. If a toxic relationship fundamentally alters your capacity to trust, to be vulnerable, or to receive genuine affection, merely removing the toxic agent does not cure the affliction. The universe, in its cruelest irony, ensures that the price is paid not by forfeiting the toxic past, but by forfeiting the desired future. The debt was settled when Rowan finally accepted that the version of himself who deserved Ellie was a version that required years of healing, a process he had tried to short-circuit. His final act of self-correction was permanent detachment, allowing Ellie the stability he could not provide. A sacrifice that validated his emotional growth only after the reward had been irrevocably lost. He went back in time, left the wrong woman, but still paid the full price because he failed to recognize that the greatest consequence of a toxic relationship is often the damage inflicted by oneself upon the potential for future love. Now, eu quero saber de você, commenti aqui embaixo. Qual teria sido a sua escolha no meu lugar? Você teria feito esse sacrifício? E se você gosta de finais surpreendentes, eu dixi outro video aqui ao lado. A uma história chocante. Clica lá. A gente se encontra no próximo video.